Hello, and welcome to another session of anime reviews. I'm going to be talking about all the stuff I watched in summer 2019 and what I thought about it. First off, as always, we're going to start with the unfortunate list of things I didn't end up watching. Like Doctor Stone, because I read the manga, I just didn't feel like it. Although I've heard, I think, mostly good things about the anime adaptation. I'm glad it's good, but it would have to be like actually insanely transcendentally good to make me want to watch it. Just because there's so many things that I haven't encountered in any form that I could be watching. Danmachi season 2. I watched like 3 episodes of, and I realized that I was just watching it for Hestia. And I was like, what's wrong with me? I had a little personal epiphany and dropped it. I don't know. It doesn't really interest me that much. I just think that the character design of Hestia is quite compelling. Granbelm, I heard a lot of good things about. It's like a mecha series with kind of magical girl elements, which is right up my alley. A friend of mine said that the mecha are all hand animated. It's not just CGI mecha fighting, which is pretty impressive and not something you see very often at all these days. So I was quite interested in it, but I just was never in the mood to like pick it up. So this is like maybe I'll watch later, hopefully. Vinland Saga, I wanted to watch just because the manga is so well regarded. It was being done by Studio Wit, and I thought, yeah, this is like a perfect match for this sort of brutal action adventure violent series. And then I was like, hey, wait, I don't want to watch a brutal action adventure violent series, even if it is really good. So I didn't bother. I think at some point I'll maybe read the manga. That seems kind of more what I'm interested in. Carol and Tuesday. So I was watching this last season. It's a two-core, and then I started kind of falling behind in various shows, and I prioritized that one the least. Not because I wasn't enjoying it. I was really enjoying it. I was very impressed by how good it was. But because I knew it was a two-core, so I was like, oh, I'll have more time to catch up with it later because it's not going to end anytime soon. But now it has ended, and I'm like ridiculously far behind on it. I think I've watched 6 or 7 episodes. So at some point, I'm gonna have to dive in and get caught back up. It's looking like next season is pretty light though in terms of things I really want to watch. So it'll be a good kind of catch up season. I can watch this and maybe Granbelm and then maybe some stuff from previous seasons, and then I can feel good about 2019. Anyways, what did I watch? First off, this show, Sonan Deska. It's a short. I kind of picked it up on a whim. The premise seemed intriguing. Four high school girls get trapped on a deserted island and have to figure out how to survive. I expected it to just be really goofy fan service. You know, they're constantly on the beach. It's all just one big beach episode, and that they would mostly be bumbling around the island having all sorts of fan servicey hijinks. And there is some of that, but there's actually quite a lot more to the show. I was quite impressed in the end. What I found is that this whole survival aspect, even though it kind of seems a little counterintuitive, it's actually really cozy. It's a cozy watch because there's always this sense of progress and achievement as they create more comforts for their camp, as they find food, as they rebuild technology. And they really appreciate all of these small comforts too. You know, just having a roof over your head, just having something soft to sleep on. Suddenly you realize how little you should be taking that for granted. How wonderful those things that are just kind of automatically assumed to be part of our lives actually are. So this kind of taking it all away and then slowly giving it back feels quite nice. And it's educational too. So the kind of twist in the series is that one of the four girls that has been stuck, their father is like a huge survival otaku who has already gotten his daughter deliberately stranded in situations like this on many occasions and has taken every opportunity to teach her survival lessons. So she has basically cheat code level knowledge of everything they ought to do. Not that she's flawless, not that she doesn't make mistakes as well, but it just kind of keeps the show moving at this really brisk pace, teaching you real survival tactics I feel a lot more comfortable with the idea of being stranded on an island after watching this, honestly. It's not crazy. I mean, I hope that I will never ever have to use this knowledge, but it is pretty cool. I like anime that teaches you something, that engages with its subject matter so truthfully and with this sort of fact-finding intent that you really do learn things. What's amazing, though, is you kind of can infer this, that if you're living on an island, you're trying to survive, and the show is actually showing you what you ought to do, that's going to end up with some pretty grim parts, some pretty brutal scenes of killing and catching animals and eating the flesh of like insects and doing all sorts of other desperate, often pretty gross type things to survive. Now, I don't know if this is supposed to be actually an aspect of the fan service, that it's supposed to appeal to people that are excited by seeing cute girls do gross things. But I found it more that they were willing to do this in spite of the fact that it kind of takes you out of this cozy, silly fan servicey mode, because they really wanted to honor the reality of the situation. Now, of course, a lot of these kind of gross out moments are played for comedy, but at times there is kind of like a sense of sentimentality, a sense of horror, of the things really landing deeply. That looking back at the animals you've killed and thanking them for spending their lives, but then also in sheer horror of being bathed in blood and blah blah blah. So I'll probably start reading the manga. It nicely sets up a few little mysteries and stuff about the nature of their island. And you gotta wonder, like, will they ever actually be saved? and how wonderful and satisfying is that going to be when that finally happens? So yeah, I would give this a 7. It's solid enough. It's held back a lot by the fact that it is just a very low budget short. Really not much to say in terms of animation quality. But I think there's enough positive elements that it's worth checking out. Wasteful Days of High School Girls, another show I watched. I've been reading the manga of this for off and on for a few years now. I'm quite behind on it now, but I'd like to get caught up at some point. I genuinely enjoyed it. It's quite funny. I was unsure though how well it would adapt to a full-length show, because most of the chapters are quite episodic, quite kind of like gag-based. There'll just be a couple running jokes for the entire chapter. Something that I think is really well executed in manga, but sometimes sort of feels insubstantial when put into anime. But I was actually really impressed in this regard. They handled it wonderfully. It was very well structured and paced. They were able to really have a good comedic timing that didn't feel kind of bogged down by having to be a full 22 minutes. The production was quite solid. All of the character animation very lively. Lots of very expressive animation breaks and stuff like that. Lots of just really fun shots. Things that kind of go into like movie parody type territory, in order to really bring about an exaggerated feeling of a scene. Yeah, overall, solid in this regard. And the OP, oh my god, what a banger. One of my favorite OPs of the year, for sure. The general humor of the show, I think, is generally pretty hilarious. The characters are so extreme, so depraved. Don't you think the main trio is just basically Nichijou? This suddenly like occurred to me halfway through watching this show, and I don't know why it wasn't obvious from the start. We have Idiot, Otaku, and Transcendent Troll Girl. This trifecta is actually like a real recipe for success, I think. So it's not that I'm mad at it for copying the Nichijou formula. It's more like, why haven't more series tried this character dynamic setup? So what's interesting is we have these characters that have really kind of extreme quirks and personalities. So far, so like that normal anime would try to dial it back to try to make them kind of more likable, more relatable, more approachable, and also to try to kind of make them feel like more complete human beings. Whereas this show will constantly just double down on these quirks, on these really depraved interactions and habits. But what you start to see from that is actually a deeper characterization, where at first you have Baka, our main character, who's an idiot, and continually we're shocked at just how big an idiot she is. But then we see scenes like the one where it really hit me is where they go out to the game center and she's like lying on the floor and refuses to get up. And you realize like this is her entire life. Like she really is this person 24/7. And because of that, the kind of crazy comedic depravity that we're witness to belies like a much more sort of complex person that we can barely even fathom, if that makes sense. And from there, you actually start to feel quite sentimental for these characters, that they're going through their lives in such twisted ways and are always kind of stumbling short of true happiness. And you really start to root for them. So they've managed to backdoor their way into the sort of connection that most anime go through by really humanizing their characters and making them kind of moe and likable. Here, just by making the characters more and more extreme, you find yourself kind of caught up in the tragedy of that extremeness. If any of this makes sense, please let me know. You can't really explain good comedy, but I'd like to try to figure out why this seems so much more than a comedy to me. So yeah, I was quite happy with this. It was a whole lot of fun. Um, I think though what limits it for me is that when you strive so hard for irreverence, when you strive so hard for sentimentality despite irreverence, it still is kind of in the end weaker in this like really kind of wonderful emotional anime mode than something that just aims for sincerity and succeeds. But yeah, I think the show actually has like quite a nice message. There's a line in the ED that says "Never begrudge individuality." Well, that's the translation. That I think is a really, really nice sentiment. So anyways, this gets an 8. Solid 8. Next, we'll talk about how heavy are the dumbbells you lift. This is Doga Kobo in a wonderful return to form. As I said last season, I was a little disappointed in how they adapted Senko. I talked about, the challenges of adapting a manga like that, but it just didn't seem like the budget was there. It just didn't seem up to their production standards. But this, though, this is Goda Kobo status, however you want to say it. So you rearrange the letters, and it becomes Goda Kobo. I was very, very happy with every single element of the production of this. The animation is so vibrant and lively and just richly detailed with all sorts of human movement and little wacky touches. There's a fantastic emergence of what I like to call diagram space, which is, I think, one of the strongest features of anime. Something like kind of just the general mode of animation that diagram space represents, where if a character is speaking about something, don't just have them speak about it, you can just warp them into some strange imagined fantasy world where they're like a fitness instructor and they're actually showing and demonstrating what they're talking about. Or, we can have the point driving home that our main character eats a lot. What better way to do that than to have it that every time she's eating something, a little pop up with the calorie count shows up? Like, it's really taking advantage of the medium, and it's done so slickly and in such wonderfully aesthetic ways that I think this is a shining example of how to take advantage of this diagram space. The money shots of the series are, of course, the workout scenes. They go really, really over the top in how a lot of the athletic challenges are depicted. It's so much fun. You can really tell when the animators are kind of letting loose in this front, and I think it's good to have avenues in every sort of series for this sort of excessive, I want to draw 500,000 keyframes. But what I thought was cool that I started to realize is that when they're doing these real workout scenes or these posing scenes, all of the big muscle man type stuff, there is a lot of genuine appreciation for the form of the body, for muscles, for what it looks like when you're ripped, you're jacked, when you've actually worked out all of these parts of their body. It showed a lot of love, I think, for that entire culture, that they wanted to show, like, yeah, we think it's cool too when that little part of your lower back juts out a bit. I mean, I don't know if I personally have the same fascination, but the fact that they are genuinely engaging with people that are that interested in it, I think is great. And yeah, like this reinforces the wonderful juxtaposition of this show: strong men, cute girls, together at last. And it seems like it could just be a joke. And of course, yes, a lot of jokes are made on that juxtaposition, but it's a real genuine appreciation of each for the qualities of each and trying to appeal to the fans of each. It's not that one is being used as a joke just to contrast with the other. If you like strong men and or you like cute girls, you'll probably like this show. The parodies I thought were really fun. The Arnold Schwarzenegger character and the Jason Statham character and stuff, like they go so hard on them for like no apparent reason, just pouring on all of these little Easter egg and joke type references and stuff. I'm sure the author of the series is a huge fan of Western movies and just kind of wanted to sneak in all of these references and stuff. But it is funny, and it's the type of humor that really catches you off guard. Um, because, as I said, most of the humor does kind of involve the juxtaposition between the sensibilities of a normal high school girl being thrown into this world of extreme macho-ness. And again, it's kind of the same joke where you think something normal is going to happen, and then instead, a bodybuilder flexes out of his shirt. But it doesn't get old. Somehow that comedic hit, like, always made me laugh, even though the same punchline just kept happening in each scenario. I found myself both looking forward to it and still surprised by it. And having that interwoven with all of these really peppery details of Western movie parodies and all of these little quirks of the diagram space and stuff, it was just a genuinely funny show all the way through. And yeah, eventually this really deranged sense of normalcy sets in, where none of these hugely contrasting images seem so strange anymore. It all just seems to like it kind of fits together somehow, even though on paper none of this show fits together with any other part of this show. Oh, it's so great. So, is this show doing a social good, or perhaps is it doing the exact opposite? Um, I've heard some reports that this is actually driving up gym attendance in Japan, especially among kind of your otaku demographics. And I think it does a really good job motivating people to work out. It talks about the benefits. It talks about the fun that it is. It talks about the hurdles and stuff that you're expected to overcome. It doesn't sugarcoat it too much. Like, it makes it very clear that it's hard and you'll get sore and you'll get frustrated and you'll hurt very badly at times, but that ultimately it's still rewarding. It's a compelling and convincing argument that you should get out and exercise. And given that people really should get out and exercise, I think this is doing a lot of good. Um, at the same time, though, the other reports I've heard from Japan are that these otaku are a menace to the gym. That they're doing it more as kind of like an anime style pilgrimage. That they're trying to go through the motions without actually genuinely trying to commit to the workout experience, doing it for the meme, so to speak, and that their hygiene is terrible. That they are stinking up gyms all over Japan. And to be able to stink up a gym is quite an impressive feat. Gym is already kind of stinky. So I don't know. I have a hard time weighing in on the social good that it's doing. Um, but among my friend group, at least, I think it was a positive. I watched this with 4 or 5 friends every week. It was a whole lot of fun. And then at the end of every episode, it encourages people at home to work out, to do one of the exercises they saw on the show along with the characters. It's a whole lot of fun. A few of us would participate each time. So the value of having an experience like that as the result of anime, I think really can't be understated. Like, of course, I watched it under these quite ideal circumstances. I think it wouldn't have been anywhere near as much fun had I watched it by myself, maybe. But a good show is able to take advantage of that and to really shine brightly in under certain circumstances. So to me, this is just a huge positive. So yeah, I was really impressed with this show. I would give this a 9. I think in terms of just the actual content of the show, maybe it would be closer to an 8. But because of the way that it kind of engaged with my life and led to some unique experiences in my life, and the way that I assume that it's probably doing the same for all sorts of otaku around the world, yeah, I'm quite comfortable bumping it up to a 9. I think this is a wonderful show. All right, so I have quite a bit to say about this show. Oh, maidens in your savage season. Um, the direction. Oh, so this is, if you don't know, it's kind of like a romantic comedy drama about this literature club. I didn't explain the premise of how heavy are the dumbbells you lift too, but I hope it's obvious. What was the other show I talked about? Wasteful Days of JK. Well, there's not really a premise there. They're just wasting their time. And they're JK. Anyways, this one, the premise is there's this literary club. They talk a lot about romance and sex as they discuss novels, and slowly they all start conversing about, well, what do you really think about this? Like, what would you really want to have happen in your life? And they all start kind of falling and stumbling into their own romantic plot lines, and things start getting quite dramatic and crazy. So, the direction of the show I think is really nice. There's very engrossing dramatic shots, but at the same time, there's these long comedic sequences that are shot totally just like a comedy and done very well in that regard too. I think these literary themes are quite well integrated and kind of give some thematic depth that when they're talking about these novels and stuff, even if it doesn't really serve that huge a purpose in the actual plot, and it's more just kind of to motivate some parallel between what they're reading and what's happening, or to tie a couple plot lines together. The fact that they really are touching on some literary classics and stuff, I think kind of makes it resonate deeper with the world. I think most of the characters are very well realized. They have strong and likable personalities, but they're flawed too, and that's quite engaging. When they suffer because of their flaws, when that leads to tragedy, the angst they go through is quite relatable. Like, it makes sense. It feels like something that you would be feeling under those circumstances too. And you kind of find yourself absorbed in what sometimes I think are really the low point of these types of stories, which is where the characters are all mopey and trying to figure out what to do next. There's some really satisfying arcs of the characters hitting moments of self-realization, overcoming their flaws, speaking out for their desires and being who they want to be, that are just totally engaging and wonderful. And I think what's really great when you have a strong enough cast of characters, the plot becomes quite irrelevant almost. That it's just the interactions between those characters are complex enough and engrossing enough. And I think this achieved it, even though I have some beef with the plot. And I was quite impressed with how they dealt with sexual themes. They talk about it a realistic amount. It doesn't have that weird kind of cone of silence that's put around things like sex as a topic in a lot of anime. That they're willing to breach these conversations and speak quite frankly about them. That felt really fresh and interesting. It kind of reminded me of Kuzu no Honkai in this regard, if you remember that show. There's a couple other kind of overlaps between the two, but what I found amazing is that this show is sexual. It deals with sexuality. It deals with sexual desire and acting in accordance of it, but it never becomes fan servicey. It never becomes about sexual titillation. You're never engaged because you're like, ooh, I hope we get to see her naked or something like that, but because it's just a compelling thing in these people's lives. Has this ever happened before? Hell yeah, I'm all for this. It's kind of a fine line to walk because you want to be explicit, you want to show what's happening, but it's just all about framing. That things are framed to you as their dramatic significance rather than titillation. So I was very impressed with that. Okay, but then there's the bad. I'm gonna say it. Forced drama. This is a big meme on A. I actually hate this term. It means almost nothing. But if there is ever a time to use it, there's definitely some forced drama in this show. So what I mean by that, I think the best is this example, that there's so many plot points that are entirely motivated just because someone ran away in the middle of a conversation. It happens over and over and over again, such that there's some disagreement, there's some miscommunication, people are shouting about it back and forth. They're like 2 sentences away from resolving the misunderstanding, from being able to just kind of say something clearly, but during this fumbling, mad part, somebody just runs away. And then we get a whole episode's worth of angsting and she didn't understand, I shouldn't have worded it like that. And total lack of communication, just separate angst that all could have been dispelled if someone just didn't run away from the middle of a conversation. Run away with their ears closed, I guess, too. I don't know. It bothers me. Every time it happened, I was just like, oh, come on. Stop running away. I think it's a little too ambitious in its complexity, too. And this isn't something I normally say about stories. Normally, I'm all for a complex story. I'm all for having lots of things that interweave and tie in with each other. But here it just kind of got exhausting. So all 5 characters, all 5 of our literary club members, have an individual plot line. They have all of their own shit that they're dealing with. But then there's usually also a few collective plot lines concerning all 5 of them, or some other subset of them, that they're kind of engaged with too, that they're worried about too. So this really gives defocus to the angst. That, we'll have our character worrying about like 3 or 4 different things at once. But it doesn't really feel realistic, and we can't really engage with any one of those problems. It's really hard to pull this off properly. And it's almost like this is a feeling you get in real life, and you can't quite handle it. You can't handle it in a way that feels satisfying or literary. So it's like, how can we expect our fictional characters to do much better? The golden standard I can think of is in Hibike. The character Kumiko is often in a situation like this, where she has problems on all levels of her life, personal to social to school to band, whatever. And yet, instead of it being this kind of weird, like we can't tell what she's thinking about feeling, it all somehow compounds to this really rich, overwhelming feeling. So I think it can be done. It's just really, really hard. Yeah, like who really can do something as good as Hibike does it? And the thing that I found worst about this, just having so many plot threads going on at the same time, is that some of the juxtapositions between scenes are genuinely frustrating. That you'll have one of the plot lines you really like, one of the plot lines where you're super into the characters and are really excited to see them succeed, and it'll cut right from some development in that to something that you're just like, oh, all right, these two again, huh? This is something that I can remember my mom watching soap operas, like watching Coronation Street, and complaining about, and even just like picking up the paper and reading when it cut to certain characters. So I guess it's just kind of the facts of life with certain genres. If you want to have all of these parallel dramatic plot lines, you can't expect the audience to be equally engaged in every single one of them. In fact, I don't think you should even hope for that. Instead, you should hope for swinging for the fences and making things that are strongly resonant with like individuals. At any rate, I guess I'm just not used to it, but I do find this sort of thing very frustrating. So I just wish that plotlines had some breathing room. I just wish that kind of more, only a couple things were happening at a time, and that when characters kind of had these angsty type moments, it was focused entirely on one big significant moment. It just kind of feels more, I don't know, like more that I could get into those characters in that way. So I think the manga, I would imagine, wouldn't have these problems as badly. Because in the manga, you are in control of the breathing room. You are in control of the pacing. So that if you want to linger on a scene and even just set the book down and not come back to it for a while, you can. You don't have to be pushed into the next room where characters you don't care about are having a stupid conversation. I sound so harsh. There's nothing that I feel that badly about in this series. There's no characters I would describe as stupid characters I don't care about or anything. But it's more just that coming off of the high of some of the scenes, it really felt like a crash. So yeah, I'd like to read the manga. Okay, let's talk about the ugly. So only most of the characters are realized well. And I just said now that there's none of the characters I would say are stupid, but there are characters that I'm just really not into, that I just don't think they did that good a job with. That they come off as like caricatures, that they're just sort of there to fit some role in the story and they don't really have anything going on beyond that. And then some developments, some plot developments, reduce characters into characters. They characterize, this is hard to say, they characterize characters. Where once was a full character that I wanted to engage with, that I wanted to see go through a whole variety of situations, instead now is a 2D cutout. I guess all of anime is 2D, but there's a cardboard cutout that has been propped up to motivate a plot point that just happens to look like the character I used to love. That's very painful. And so I don't think it's about the irrationality of it. I don't think it's like that they sort of dishonor these characters because they end up doing stupid things to advance the plot. Because I think acting irrationally in service of a larger emotional arc is great. That you do something out of character because you're so emotional. That actually reflects a real depth to the character and can be something that's quite resonant with the audience. But some plotlines have emotional arcs that it's like, how do I put this? It's like one thing to act irrationally in service of emotions that are compelling. It's another thing to act irrationally in service of an emotion that seems like it's just been thrust into you for the convenience of the plot. That it doesn't feel like that character would actually feel. You know what I'm saying? So again, it's like a frustrating thing. It's like I don't want them doing it like that to my characters. I don't want them disrespecting my girls. I don't know. I don't know how to put it. And then some plot lines seem to glorify some things that I think are immoral. Okay? And yes, I realize the irony of talking about immorality in a show that's largely about the harmfulness of moralizing and calling things immoral and casting judgments against people. But I'm not trying to be a prude. It's not that I'm having beef with the things that the show is having beef with. It's not that I'm aligning myself with the characters that are prudes on the show. I just have other beef. And I don't really want to get into the specifics of this because I don't really think that it's about the specifics. It's more about just this feeling I had where I'd be watching it and I'd be like, oh God, really? Like, are you really saying that this is okay? You know? So it doesn't really matter what it is that I'm saying this about as so much as that it made me do that. And some of them do have either a good emotional payoff where sure, maybe I have some moral beef with it, but it's so moving in the end that it's okay. Or it can even have a good moral lesson in the end that I do agree with. And for all I know, if I kept reading the manga, maybe all of these plot lines would have such a thing in it. But like while I'm experiencing it, I don't know. It's like we've had oops, the camera's in the way. We've had some big conversations in previous videos about moral messages in art and how important it is to agree with them, and what kind of shortcomings does a work have if it can't be convincing in its moral messages and such. Putting aside all of that, though, what really bothers me is just a feeling of frustration that I want better for the characters. It's like, okay, sure, maybe there is some payoff to going through this whole process where I'm kind of feeling frustrated, or deceived or let down or whatever. But there could just as easily, well, maybe not just as easily, but there could be a plot that doesn't have that, where it feels like the characters are really being their full selves, where it feels like nobody is being reduced and nothing horrible is being said. So it's like, I just want that. I just so acutely want that while I watch this show that it becomes quite frustrating. So there is, though, the wonderful. We're leaving on a high note, of course. Because I'm being pretty harsh with this show. Normally, I'm not so critical with anime. I wouldn't be nitpicky about consistency of characterization or the moral messages of each and every little plot point or anything like that. Normally, I wouldn't care so much. But the reason I care so I'm so invested is because I was so compelled. I found myself hanging on every single plot development. I found myself wrapped up and really caring about what was going to happen with each and every plot. I was invested. Every development and every plot line, I was invested. So that's impressive. And some of the scenes are just overwhelmingly beautiful. Like, I don't know. It hits some romantic sweet spots just as good as anything else I've seen. Really. I can't overstate this. I was so impressed. Cute moments, heartwarming moments, big dramatic moments. Sometimes it just gets your heart aflutter. And when that happens, there's not many feelings that are better than that in all of watching anime. And there's a lot of crying. Show made me cry a lot. And as I said, it's so frustrating to have one scene that's like making you cry because you think it's so beautiful, and then it cuts to a scene where you're like, stop being such an idiot. What's wrong with you? Like, talk about an emotional roller coaster. But roller coasters are fun. So the triumph, though, through these plot frustrations does feel super satisfying. When things finally kind of click in a way that I'm like, oh, this was worth it. I do like this payoff. I do like this resolution. After all of that feeling of like, oh God, what are they doing? That is quite satisfying. And then other things that I just never ever saw coming, little plot twists and stuff that I never would have hoped that they would go in that direction. It felt miraculous. It felt like such a blooming of hope for the entire series. So that was great too. So I'm really glad that I can get into a het romance series like this now. There would have been a time where I never even would have considered watching this show because I was such a Yuri devotee, and for some reason, just reading and watching het just made me very uncomfortable. Hetero-romantic romances. Actually, I shouldn't say for some reason. I actually understand quite well why that used to bother me so much. But it's just like a whole thing, so we won't get into it right now. At any rate, watching the show a few times, I really thought to myself, like, man, I can remember when I never would have touched this, and now I'm just loving it, so, yeah. Alright, so what would I give this show? I think an 8. I think an 8 is fair. It does some things really extremely well. Some moments I thought were 10 out of 10. And then other moments I thought were like 2 out of 10. So overall, I can only give it like an 8. Yeah. Okay. Here's another one I'm quite excited for. Machikado Mazoku. So this one I picked up pretty late into the season. Episode 10 had just aired. And a lot of my friends were freaking out about it. And I was like, wow, I totally forgot the show even existed. So I started watching it. I didn't really expect too much, even though my friends were so excited. I thought it would just be really funny. Just antics. It looked like a very silly show. But I'm so glad that I picked it up. This show it's really something special. So it basically succeeds at absolutely everything you could ever want a show like this to do. But then it also just transcends your expectations again and again and again. So the premise is, a girl awakens to her genetic demonic powers and is tasked with hunting down a magical girl in order to use her blood to release the seal put on the demonic clan, leading to hijinks when she's saved from a truck by the ludicrous strength of the very magical girl she was seeking. Wow! Sounds insane. It is. I have quite a lot to say about this one. Okay. First off, some general praise. The animation is super wonderful, extremely lively, great use of backgrounds, big artistic shifts, all of these things that I really love about anime as a medium. Just breaking out of the convention of shooting it as if it was a live action show, but allowing each and every shot to be restructured from the ground up to convey all of the emotions and energy of the characters. Just fantastic. It's Hidamari-like in this regard. That's the highest praise I can give like editing and direction and production in anime is to say it reminds me of Hidamari Sketch, because Hidamari Sketch is just all about this freedom. It's hilarious as just a goofy comedy show, and even though it's so much more. The plots have these wonderful like train wreck type feelings, you know, of you see what's gonna go wrong, but then 5 other things are tagged on that go even wronger. It's just insane in that regard, and I love it. And I love that every character in the series, well, almost every, is suffering. That as a result of these plot lines, they all suffer in their own ways. It's fun to just look at any given situation and pick out, you know, well, she's unhappy because of this, she's unhappy because of this, she's unhappy because of this. So lovely. And despite that, and despite suffering being the primary mode of comedy here, almost kind of like a cringe comedy, a la early Watamote or a lot of Western and British type stuff. Even though it has that as its core of why it's so funny, it's also really, really wholesome, genuinely heartwarming and sentimental and just so fluffy and lovely. It does it all. It's extremely frantically paced. I would say 1.6 times this, or 0.6 times the speed of Take-You. Over halfway to the insane ADHD pace of Take-You. If you've ever watched Take-You, you gotta go check it out. It's definitely like just the most insane anime ever made. But this is pretty insane too. It has just very rapid dialogue, plot points just hitting you in a flurry. We were watching it with some friends a bit ago, and my one friend came over, and he was like, "Is this video file playing fast or something? Like, why are the characters like talking so fast?" But that's just how it is. It gives it all of this kind of adds up to this sense of denpa-ness. You know, denpa meaning radio waves, which has become slang in Japan for that kind of maddening, manic sense of just information overload. Um, so it's denpa in all of its kind of production and structure and pacing, but also in how the premise is conceived and the sort of elements of the plot. So despite it being like very denpa and insane and modern, the premise is so timeless and iconic, which kind of meshes in with the denpa-ness in a really interesting way. Like demons and magical girls are two classic eras of the past in terms of it being like a really iconic archetype, right? Like when you have a magical girl show and it's sort of subversive and such, you're invoking a tradition that goes back to, you know, Tezuka manga and like the 50s and 60s, and then things like Sailor Moon, of course, and Cardcaptor Sakura that like really established it in the 90s. It's a whole rich cultural tradition. And then if you invoke demons, you're doing the same kind of thing where you're like kind of hitting all of these historical notes and how demons have been presented. But it goes all the way back to like 2000 BC. Like, when did people start caring about demons? It's been forever ago. Humans have always had some sort of conception of a demon, you know? So by kind of simultaneously invoking these sorts of things together and kind of putting them on the same level, demons and magical girls, it creates this like really, I don't know how to describe it. And then there's stuff like there's so many kind of Dragon Quest memes and gags and stuff. Like kind of the way they conceive of the world almost has this classic JRPG understanding to it that adds yet another column of like reference and archetype. Even little things like in the soundtrack, there's all these little kind of pseudo Celtic motifs, you know, like a pan flute kind of swirling along. Often scenes with Shamiko's ancestor will have this, and for some reason it kind of ties everything to this long history. Everything feels like it's being subverted again and again and again for the comedy, but it's also warmly familiar. Like it all kind of lines up with how you would think a plot like this would play out. To me, this is just kind of classic anime crazy. And I want you to think way, way back to when you were first kind of learning about anime. And probably what you were kind of first told about it, your first impressions of it, is that it was like really, really crazy, and none of the plot lines like made any sense, and it was full of like all these like wacky characters and stuff. That I think is one of kind of the most outer edges of anime. Is like, did you know in Japan there's this whole animated series about like whatever? Whoa, that's so crazy! Like, how could that be a whole show? You know? Um, and I think this really brings that back in a really great way. There's this weird sense of iconic usage, like the Shamiko statue, but then also like octopus wieners and peaches, and that there's this kind of visual language of the show that gets built up through all of these little comedic plot points. Um, Actually, oops, I meant to put this in the previous one, the transformation theme. This to me is like another really iconic thing. If you listen to the music that plays when Shamiko transforms, I really wish I had words to describe this type of music because I love it. The best I can say is like the kind of music that's used in the puzzle games of the early 90s in Japan. That's the only other thing I can connect it to. At any rate, sorry, yeah, this is about the timelessness of the series and not the anime crazy of it. So yeah, this really feels like it could have come out of the 90s in the best possible way. It reminds me a lot of Mahojin Guru Guru in this regard, if you've seen that series. It has a lot of the same kind of classic crazy action. So I love all sorts of evolutions in anime. In general, I'm very happy with kind of the overall direction of anime as a medium. But I'm also really happy that shows like this are still being made too. Okay, let's talk a bit about characterization. So every character in this show is fantastic. Just every one of them. They're all great. They're all loaded with extreme personalities, quirks, running gags, even their own kind of like library of animation subversions. That there's like lots of kind of recurring gags where the animation will shift a lot that kind of line up with our character expectations. So there's all of these weird relationships between these characters. It's not kind of your standard, oh, she goes to school and she has like 6 friends and those are the characters, but she's interacting both with the magical girl and then her ancestor who's sealed away, and then her mom and her little sister, and then her magical girl's friend, and then her friend at school, but then her other friend at school that's like a crazy, creepy honors student. Like everybody has a different sort of relation to Shamiko and a different relationship with one another. And then the plot just delights in twisting these up like strands of spaghetti that just when you kind of have a handle on how everyone sees each other, some new plot twist will throw it all into disarray again. Yeah, there's all these bizarre and varied modes of interaction, like you can only communicate with Shamiko's ancestor like through the statue unless she like possesses Samiko or they give her a body. Like there's all these kind of weird rules and stuff that leads to all of these bizarre interactions again and again. But deep down, all of these characters are actually quite human. And without it feeling forced or out of character, they have the breathing room to express their kind of complexities as a human being. But Momo and Shamiko, the two main characters, are just so wonderful. Oh my god, I just love these characters so much. The first thing I want to talk about is how the two of them represent just a masterclass in expression in anime. There's Shamiko's tail, which is just brilliant. We'll be talking about that in more depth in a second, but basically her little demon tail is constantly reacting to everything that's happening in her emotional state. Meanwhile, Momo's general kind of expressionlessness is a really nice contrast with that. We have something that's like beyond human in its level of expression, which kind of aligns with anime in general. There's always kind of the exaggerated faces and facial movements and distortions in animation, but Shamiko goes even further because of this tail thing. But then we have Momo, who's like stone-faced, who has like 3 different facial expressions, who doesn't seem to react to everything. And the balance between those two is just hilarious. But then what you start really realizing is that Momo is actually expressed really beautifully and subtly. That the very small details they include in showing her behavior, showing her the way she carries herself and how she speaks, subtly do change to bring out these unique aspects of her characterization in a way that I think is also very unique to anime. Like people always talk about the exaggeration of anime in character expression, but it also can allow for a greater importance on these subtle details because you can see the intention behind even just the smallest tweak and how her face is drawn. Do you know what I mean? I think that's so cool. So let's look at some examples. All right, so here we have just an essential shot of the series. Shamiko's tail twisting around Momo a bunch of times. She's very happy. But what's going on with Momo's expression? It's inscrutable. And yet, if you watch the show, if you see this scene in context, you can read into it a lot, and it like makes sense. Like it's the perfect expression, even though it seems just the same as so many of her other ones. Ah, here we see a very excited Momo. You can tell like certain ways in which she's sort of losing herself to this feeling, that her attempts to kind of stay composed are losing out to excitement. Just these sort of evolutions of emotion, fantastic. Shamiko eating Ichigo Daifuku. Her tail just swimming in happiness. Look at that happy face. So indulgent. And then Momo not even in frame. I think that's key. There's so many times where they don't even show you her face. This is a classic. This has the awesome like toot, toot, toot sound that makes when she gets really, really mad. You can see her tail going off at right angles. Whenever the tail starts veering off at right angles and kind of, I don't know, like snapping, it's very entertaining for me. I find that really funny for some reason. Here's another good one. You can tell there's subtle differences between these two. This one is pure anger, and things are just veering off in this very kind of confrontational way. Here, though, it's like more of a subtle bend. It's not quite sure where it's going. Lots of little twists. So this reflects a lot more like embarrassment and confusion and stuff. Another classic Momo face. Is it the exact same as the one in the first picture? No, it's not. There's subtle differences. And even if you can't point them out using your memory, your subconscious mind reads these faces a little bit different. Isn't that cool? Here's sad Momo. So again, another unique feature of anime is to be able to use signifiers of character emotion that are just totally impossible in real life. Like, of course, those little steam clouds coming out of Shamiko earlier. Nobody has steam clouds coming out of them. Moreover, nobody really turns this blue when they're sick or disappointed or whatever. And yet, when you do it in anime, it feels kind of natural. And again, it's sort of like a subtle layering over the face that we've come to recognize. This is a good one. Momo getting scared by the dog. Again, the tail going off at all sorts of angles. But it's different. It's subtly different. And it's like unraveling the cones in Cuddle Escher Bach, that you have to de-knot them, and each bend in the knot signifies something. I think somewhere between 0 and 1 people will get this reference. I'll be so impressed if someone gets this reference. Cuddle Escher Bach, go read it. Great book. Anyways, I just love this tale. That's all I'm trying to say. Yeah. So, lots and lots of fun, this show. Fantastic characterization. And yet it transcends past that. Because at first it seems like this convoluted premise is just to set up the characters. It's just so that they can have this sort of relationship. But, you know, that would be fine. It would still be, like, worth it. That's still totally a valid reason to go this hard into your premise. But the plot actually does develop, which is crazy. You would never think in a show like this that there would actually be a substantial plot with arcs and changes and developments. Things change. Characters are introduced. New characters. And then they have arcs. New characters, and then they change again. There's goals that are set and accomplished, and then new goals are set. Isn't that crazy? Mysteries are created and then solved. And what I think is so cool is not just that it has a plot, you know, lots of anime have plot, but that it so masterfully balances being so gag-based, being so comedic, and then taking the premises that you set up for those gags and turning them into actual legitimate plot points. So something that you thought was just a throwaway joke, like, haha, the rules of this world are so weird, later end up actually having major implications in the story. Isn't that cool? And you can peek at the plot through these holes. Like when they make that sort of joke, you can take it as, oh, ha ha ha, that's a silly joke. Or you can try to be like, oh, wait a minute, what does that actually mean for our characters? What does this actually mean for their relationships? And sometimes you actually get to look at future plot points by peering through those holes. That they actually allow you to anticipate things. The evidence and the lead-ins were there. This reminds me a lot of the Monogatari series, which is just masterful in doing this. So when you have a series like this that's also reminding me of Monogatari, like, it's going well. And what this all leads to is some really big emotional arcs, like things going into dramatic territory that I thought this show would never be able to pull off. Really getting you emotionally invested in the characters and caring a lot about them getting out of these situations. And all of this peaks at this godly final episode. Oh my gosh. You know, most sorts of anime like this, just kind of character-driven comedy anime, you don't really care about the final episode. You know, maybe it's like a little more sentimental than normal, or maybe they do something kind of wacky with it. But very rarely does it leave a huge impression on you. Very rarely does it stand out in your mind as that was the last episode and no other episode could have been the last episode. But here, yes, they hit it out of the park. Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the best part of the show. Let's talk about the instance of transcendence that stands above all the others. The thing that transcends transcendence itself, the Yuri plotline. So this is the best example, as I said, of transcendence, is how Momo and Shimiko's relationship develops and evolves throughout the series. So I called it super hard. Hardest read of my life. I'm so proud of myself. You know, I often make jokes about how I just ship Yuri plot lines into everything, how anytime there's two girls on screen, I'm like, maybe they'll get together. And I do, to some extent. But it's like, I know realistically, I'm like skeptical realistically, but something about Momo and Shamiko's interactions, right from the get-go, I was like, oh, there's something actually really substantial here. There's a sort of love, at first kind of just from Momo to Shamiko, some fascination she has with her that I was just hooked on, that I was like so sure could have this potential. And yet, because I was just thinking of it at the time as a silly gag comedy with a weird premise, I never ever thought that this would actually be explored. But I was so happy because every episode, more and more and more, and again, I just felt validated that their relationship really was growing. That evidence of Momo's love for Shamiko and Shamiko's kind of incoherent, bubbling up feelings towards Momo were there, that it was true, that I was right. I just, it was so beautiful. So yeah, Momo has this kind of mysterious fascination with Shamiko. It's very cute and very engrossing, and at the same time, it almost doesn't feel mysterious at all because like we the viewers love Shamiko. We the viewers fell in love with Shamiko as soon as we saw those horns on her head. So there's no way that Momo could resist those charms as well. And it's just this kind of process of like, oh no, like all of this does make sense. It's so honest and yet so distant. She's so willing to say embarrassing, sentimental things to Shamiko with a straight face and really mean them. And yet her expressionlessness, her mysterious past, all of these things still kind of leave you wanting more, you know? Complexities and tragedies inherent in their relationship are like, try to think about this. Shamiko wants to kill Momo and take her blood so that her demonic clan can be restored, but like, does she really want to do that? Like, and at the same time, Momo saved her life. Momo has an important role as the guardian of the city. Shamiko is constantly indebted to Momo. At the same time, Momo wants Shamiko to become stronger so that she too can help protect the city. Like, there's so many layers, there's so many conflicts, that it always makes sense that they don't really know how to treat each other. Their character types are just so good, and that they're contrasted in like every possible way you can think of. And yet in the end, there's this like really wonderful harmonic balance where they just complement each other so perfectly in comedic scenes and more dramatic scenes and low key slice of life sentimental scenes. It's like, what more could you ask for? The sentimental moments hit so well for such a bizarre and wacky show that you can reflect on this relationship between demons and magical girls and feel just that kind of warm joy in your heart. Like, what? What? Seriously, what? So, I don't know. I'm sorry, because talking about the fact that there is such a substantial romantic or pseudo-romantic or whatever you want to call it plot line, I guess it's kind of spoilers. As I said, I certainly wouldn't have realistically expected it, even though I knew. Um, so I'm sorry in that regard, but I think there's always kind of a trade-off between not wanting to give away too much of a show and then wanting to make like a strong recommendation, right? So in this situation, I think it works out that there's a lot of people that I think would be very interested in watching a show that has these qualities, that is just like a really nice relationship type show, that wouldn't have ever thought to watch this show had I not explicitly spoiled the fact that there is those elements. So I hope you can kind of see my perspective on this. But at the same time, it's like, I have another way to make a strong recommendation, which is, of course, to give it a 10. Yeah, I think this is a 10. There's just, it's so good. It's just so good. Like, nah, yeah, it's a 10. It's a 10. Okay. So, I didn't mean to go to this next slide right away. I wanted to kind of pause here for a second. But yeah, I don't know. I guess this is all I have to say about this show. It's a 10. But let's now engage in a little meta rating discussion. So that's all I'm gonna have to actually say about anime itself. So this might not interest you. You can close the video now. But I wanted to kind of take a look back. So this is the third reviews video now. I hope you like them. I really love making these. I think this is like kind of the type of content in terms of like formatting and the work I put into it ahead of time, and kind of how deep I can get into things while I'm making it. This is like probably some of my favorite content to make. So I really hope you enjoy them too. I'm gonna keep going. We've reviewed 17 shows so far. I just want to keep adding to that number. I want to see that number go up to some crazy amount. So let's break down the scores so far. We've had 1 4, which was Kemono Friends Season 2. We've only had 2 7s. We've had 5 8s, had 5 9s, and 2 10s. So that's like a very top-heavy distribution. Very, very top-heavy. And not really that broken up either. Like, it's a pretty uneven distribution. So the average score is an 8.125 for things I've given. This is the whole breakdown, if you're curious. It's out of the way. I'm hoping to keep this up each season. There's no real good place to put the camera. I'll just mostly go out of the way here. Yeah, nothing too surprising, probably. I think I agree with all these scores still. I wanted to keep track of the studios too. You know, once I've done enough shows, we can do some interesting things about like which season was best overall, which studio does best overall, things like that. So this is fun. I'm glad I'm doing this. So I don't think this score distribution reflects any sort of inability on my part to score things meaningfully. I think these are good scores that I'm coming up with. I really do. And I think given my discretion in watching shows, how I go about watching things, I would hope that the average show I watch is around an 8. Like, I think that's like a fine goal to have, and that it's going well. Like, I generally only watch things that I have some reason to believe will be good. I don't just kind of watch things at random. It's mostly recommendations, studios that I know, directors that I know, adaptations that I know, things like that. Sometimes a show will just kind of strike my fancy, and I'll pick it up for basically no reason. Um, but you know, even then, like whatever it is that kind of hit me about it, it's probably something to that. Also, I'm totally willing to drop things that seem bad. Like I'll drop things pretty quick, which is maybe not a good thing in an anime reviewer, but I only have so much time, right? So I think this is, as I say, like I think I'm fine with my scores, but the problem is that it's kind of detracting in the value of these scores. So let's look back at our 3 reasons for giving scores, way back from the first review video, which was the Winter 2019 one. I wanted hype. I wanted to be able to hype you up about a show by putting a big number. I wanted to help people prioritize shows, that if there's a couple of shows they're trying to decide between watching, they can use my scores maybe as a reference to think, well, you know, Keatster really likes this one, so maybe I'll check that out first. And then kind of as a summary of how I overall feel about the show, in case the review kind of gets bogged down in technicalities and stuff. This video is an hour long, so obviously that sort of thing happens with me. That you have a point that you can go to in the review, and it sort of encapsulates overall my feelings. So, I think having everything stacked towards just the same few scores, just like 8s and 9s mostly, works against all of these. So 9s and 10s aren't that hype if there's too many of them. If it's just another 9, that doesn't say a whole lot. It doesn't make you very excited about this particular show. And you can't really prioritize between everything if everything is just getting 9s and stuff, right? Like, there's not really a ranking anymore. It also doesn't really sum up the point if it's just, oh, it was good, right? Like, if you want to just get my general sense of an anime, it's probably going to be, oh, it was good, you know? So, it's kind of like the scores aren't doing their job because of this. So what should I do? What should I do about this? One solution is to actually just watch more bad anime. And I'm pretty curious about this. I would really like to watch more bad anime. I think I could say some interesting things about a bad show. I would like to delve in deeper as to why bad shows are bad, what makes them not work. And it would provide an exciting contrast for the shows I really do like. It might help me appreciate them even more, you know? Plus, you know, by trying to watch bad anime, who knows? I could find something that I really like that I never would have thought I would like. It seems like there's a lot of benefits to watching some bad anime. And, you know, overall, I think this channel is an extremely positive one. It's all about me talking about things that I like. Very, very rarely will I bother talking about something I dislike because, you know, why would I have engaged with that media in the first place? But maybe it would be a nice change of pace. It's kind of fun. Like, I like watching negative reviews and reading negative reviews. It's quite cathartic at times. So I think I could have a lot of fun providing that as well, and maybe that's something people would like to see. At the same time, I don't want this to be like a mean channel. I really don't like... it's happened a few times, and I've always felt bad where I will like kind of offhandedly shit on something as like a joke in some video, and then someone in the comments will be like, oh, I was disappointed to hear you didn't like whatever. You know, I'm a big fan. I think it actually has a lot of good merits or whatever. And then it's like, oh, geez, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't really mean that much by it. It was just supposed to be a stupid joke. So does this seem worth it? And then it's like, okay, so if I don't want to just kind of casually diss stuff, which makes me feel callous, then is the solution to offer like a really brutal takedown to try to show you, no, this is a bad show. No, this does deserve all the jokes coming to it. That just seems even worse. Like, it's one thing to have someone make a comment that's like, you know, I'm sorry that you couldn't get into the show. I really liked it. It's another thing to have someone make a comment that's like, oh, I used to like this, and now I don't. Or even worse, I used to like you, and now I don't because you just shut. I don't know. I don't know. So I don't know if this is a good solution. The real problem though is who has the time. Like I already feel like I can't keep up with all the shows I want to watch because they're genuinely good. So how am I possibly going to have the time to watch a bunch of garbage that will only kind of elucidate what makes garbage garbage? So I don't know. The other thing I could do is kind of spread out the scale a bit. So things that I used to give a 7, maybe I'll give a 4 or 5. 8s become 6s or 7s. 9s become 8 or 9s. 10s are still 10s, something like that. So there's more of a range of scores that anime are actually likely to get. This solves a lot of our problems. I have a few problems with this though, because I kind of want to match people's general understanding of what these numbers mean. Like, no matter what medium you're talking about, no matter what reviewer you're talking about, generally speaking, an 8 is an 8. You kind of know what an 8 means. And maybe you have your own personal perception of that. And maybe that personal perception is actually very inconsistent between people. But everyone still has in their mind something consistent across reviews of what these scores mean. And I kind of want to match that. I want to have something that me giving it an 8 is my equivalent to someone else giving it an 8 in terms of what impact I want that score to have on the viewer. You know? And there are, of course, exceptions to this. Like there's a famous music reviewer, Scarufi, who has his own kind of understanding of what these scores mean and is very like religious about it, which means that it ends up in situations where he gives an album like a 5 out of 10, and people are like, "What the fuck, Scroofy? Why do you hate this so much?" But really, that's like a good score for him. So like, I don't really like that sort of situation. Like, I don't want to get into that situation. And I do want room in my scale for every show. Like even though I have issues with this watch bad anime plan, if I did watch a bad anime, I want a score that I've left open for that bad anime to give it. So I don't know about this one. Other things I could do is to de-discrete the scale. That is to say, to start doing 0.5s or even just 0.x, anywhere, you know, within a 100-point scale instead of a 10-point scale, or a 20-point scale, I guess, if I wanted to do 0.5s. This kind of annoys me. It feels a little bit more arbitrary. It feels like I don't have as clear an understanding of when I would use each score, and that it could lead to situations where I actually have kind of conflicts in my mind about, you know, oh, I gave this like an 8.7, gave this other show an 8.5. I think I actually like the 8.5 one better. Like that's so much more likely, which bothers me. And like, what is an 8.3 versus an 8.4? Like, how would I ever actually make that judgment? I don't know. It doesn't seem right to me. I think this only starts to become very useful when you have a huge library of reviews. Then you can start kind of being a little more discreet, or less discreet. Sorry, a little more analog, and it starts making sense, I guess. I don't know. Maybe this is the best solution. People like this idea. If I did this, I would probably have to go back and re-rate everything from before on the new scale, just so I can differentiate better. Yeesh. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we should just do nothing. Because at this point, hearing myself talk, it's like, does anyone besides me care about this? I'm saying these things about how I'd have to go like back and re-rate old shows to put decimal places in. That would like bug me otherwise. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can clearly hear my own neurosis talking. I can clearly hear everyone else saying, oh my god, who cares? Or saying something totally irrelevant because they closed the video. So I don't know. Let me know. Do you think this is a problem? Should I do something to change it? We're at a point now where we've done 3 of these videos, and my plan is to just keep doing them because I think they're really fun. But it's like I want to kind of hammer out how I want to do it now. I don't want to be like 8 or 9 videos in and then go like, oh geez, I really wish I had changed the scoring system. So yeah, look forward at the end of the or at the start of the next year, probably sometime in January. we're going to have a triple combo of videos. First, the fall 2019 reviews, stuff that I'm going to be watching this coming season, some of which may have already started for all I know, which is very exciting. Then we're going to have the top 10 anime of 2019. That'll be, of course, I hope quite exciting for you. I'm hoping to put quite a lot of effort into such videos, yearly lists. But then the video that I'm most excited for, that I'm planning on going the hardest on, perhaps of any video I've made so far, is our top 20 anime of the 2010s, because the decade is ending. So yes, please look forward to that. All right, that's it. It was a long video. Thanks for sticking it out. Let me know if you have any thoughts or feelings about these types of videos or any of the anime I talked about, of course. It was a good season. Overall, a very good season. Hopefully next season will prove to be as good. Bye-bye.